Welcome to the Low Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD and the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I think this episode is so important. I want to have it on both podcasts. So we have, it actually is a little bit vindicating for me because Tro and I back in episode number 10 and 13 of Low Carb MD, like 4 or 5 years ago now, talking about the benefits we were seeing from a psychological standpoint in our patients when they got their diet right. And a hellstorm broke out and everyone said, you guys should have your license revoked. Nutrition has nothing to do with mental health. And so I have two guests here, a psychiatrist, Dr. Rachel Brown, and Ali Houston, who struggled with mental illness his entire life. And he's one of the most educated guys because he had to do it for survival. So it's so great to have you both on, and thank you for joining me, and let's talk.
Oh, thanks, Brian. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, Ali, let's start with your story, just in a nutshell of what your life was like, what you went through in life, and what brought you to reaching out to other people now with MedSci, really being able to counsel people and help them through mental illness.
Yeah, so my mental health issues, tracked right back to when I was a child. And I collected autoimmune illnesses, which I think are probably related. And by the time I really was in crisis and fixed it with diet and lifestyle, I had seasonal depression. I had chronic anxiety that had got really, really bad. I had adult diagnosed ADHD, so brain fog and just feeling like I didn't have access to my brain, and various other ailments, gut problems, couldn't control my weight. And I'd just started a PhD in gravitational wave physics. And I was really mentally at my worst ever and was starting to have suicidal ideations. And my supervisor, a physics professor who's now retired, he took early retirement, but he's called Professor Ken Strain. He had healed his chronic fatigue syndrome ME using diet. And he'd gone from being told he wouldn't work again to going on a keto diet, and then 6 months later running 10Ks. So he developed this sideline in understanding the nutrition science, and he was able to point me in the right direction of blogs like Hyperlipid or Gary Tobbs's work and various other places. And I just, devoured the literature that was there at the time and all of the stories, and changed my diet to a ketogenic diet. And within weeks, the problems that that I listed there to you, they went away. It was like a quantum leap in my mental health. And I was already a few years into my PhD funding. I hadn't really performed that well. I left the PhD and decided I'm going to help people do what I did. And fast forward 7 years, I'm a health coach now. I've maintained that good state of mental wellness, and I help other people to do the same. And I've just started MetSci.com, as you said, with Rachel, who's a psychiatrist here in the UK.
And Rachel, I mean, that is amazing in its own. So how do you, as a doc, start saying, let me look at nutrition? How does this fit in with mental health? How do you start making these connections in your professional work? I don't know if you have a background in depression, anxiety yourself, or if you just started, wanted to help your patients more.
Yeah. So I don't have a personal background in kind of major diagnosable depression or anxiety or any other mental health disorders as such. But what I do have is a very long-standing interest and just want to know really and understand what underlies all sorts of chronic health conditions. So I've had a long-standing interest in holistic health for many years. But even when I think back to teenage years, I remember somewhat ironically writing to Mars to ask them why they were including hydrogenated oils in their Maltesers because it was so unhealthy. And I see the irony in that now. But I've just always had a real fascination with nutrition, and it's something that I've just read about for years and years. And then I've been in the low carb sphere for about the past 25 years. Kind of started off on Atkins, and it's just been a bit of a personal health journey ever since then. And I'm somebody who has struggled with sugar addiction. So that's been more my major health journey in terms of modifying my diet, and particularly kind of delving into low carb and then very low carb and ketogenic diet ultimately. And I was lucky enough in 2021 to train with Dr. Georgia Ede. And, I often say, never in my career have I been so interested in a piece of continuous professional development as I was in studying with Dr. Georgia Ede in terms of the application of ketogenic diets for clinicians, specifically to treat mental health disorders. And when I found out that she was running that course, it was just kind of music to my ears, and I had to be one of the first people to do that and make it happen. But otherwise, I've kind of practiced within mainstream psychiatry and, came through medical school in Edinburgh, and I've stayed on there, and I still continue to work as a consultant psychiatrist in the NHS, albeit my practice has changed over the last few years in particular, after training with Georgia.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've noticed. One of the tragedies of medicine, in my opinion, has been psychiatry, the loss of that. It's probably the most intimate area of medicine, really, because we're dealing with childhood trauma and stress and depression and binge eating and alcohol abuse. And all these things are so important. But in the States, at least, what we find is the psychiatrist says, here's your pill, here, go see a psychologist, or go, figure out life. And I'll just, it's amazing. I have so many patients who've seen psychiatrists and they said, they just say, are you having side effects from the medicine? Okay, we're going to go up on the dose, or we're going to go down on the dose, or we're going to add another medicine. But no one's really talking to them about the underlying life stress or not sleeping or whatever or nutrition that may be affecting mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. One of my biggest frustrations, and it kind of gnaws away at me increasingly and has done over the years, is just taking what seems to be quite a simplistic approach to make a diagnosis and then prescribe a medication or another type of treatment. And I think, unfortunately, well, most doctors, you'll know yourself, we don't get any formal training in nutrition. Certainly I didn't as an undergraduate. And it's really just, it strikes me that it's good fortune really when people tend to come into this field and particularly think about metabolic health. It tends to be from a very kind of personal standpoint and interest that people have alongside happening to be a doctor.
Yeah, and it's great that you two are pairing up just to have ongoing care, because that's one of the things I've really been learning. I've been in like strictly metabolic health and direct primary care for the last 2.5 years or so, and I've started to realize like I can't do it all. I mean, I'm a limited resource, so having people around me who are trained up, who understand, having a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant or someone who's a nutrition counselor or exercise physiologist, that really we can work together to really best help that patient. So I'm not sure how your program works. Do patients go back and forth between you two, or how does that generally work? Or are you mostly doing like online videos, or how from a practical standpoint, how are you reaching these patients?
Yeah, so we've set up so that at the moment I'm available to do one-to-one coaching with people when I have space in the schedule. And we have a waiting list at the moment for small group sessions, which will be with both myself and Rachel. And we're currently developing a kind of off-the-shelf product, a course that will have 8 modules, which will cover all of the necessary information from how different diets can affect different mental disorders, all the way to kind of how to implement it, food addiction, and various other topics. And that course is going to be called Mental Power, and we're looking at launching that later in the year. And there'll also be live Q&As involved weekly with myself and Rachel. So it's kind of hopefully a one-stop shop, so that people who need that extra support can find the type of support that they need. Some people need more one-to-one help. Some people like the idea of a group session and accountability with lots of different people. And some people just want a kind of more off-the-shelf approach. So we hope we can cover all bases there.
Yeah, and that's great because some people are, they're private or they're going through depression. They say, I don't want to be on camera. And I run into that too with patients who need it the most. We do Zoom meetings every 2 weeks and we all get together. And some people say, I don't want my camera on, or I'll put my camera. And then sooner or later, they start putting their camera on more and engaging. But at first, sometimes they're just listening to what other people are doing. And then also just realizing they're not the only ones with struggles. I think that's a huge benefit of having groups. But sometimes people are, you might want to talk about more intimate things and be one-on-one where all your social group's not listening, which makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say about being a primary care physician and feeling like there's more to be done than you can manage in one practice. And I think, when we spoke last, I was talking about various benefits I've found of changing my diet and lifestyle, but the mental health really is the most important to me and the most profound change that I felt, because I got my brain back. As a scientist, that was huge. And my emotional regulation just became so much better. But I think it's not just that people want to feel like there's other people like them out there in terms of maybe weight loss, or with Virta, it might be that it's about type 2 diabetes and sharing specific experiences of that. I think with mental health, there's still something of a stigma and a taboo around certain symptoms and certain experiences, things like psychosis or, it's extreme anxiety, OCD, intrusive thoughts, and the list goes on, where it is really nice to be able to know that the people in the room have gone through that exact same experience. So I think there's space there for niching down in that particular way, but also because, like both Rachel and I have learned doing Georgia Eads course, there's specific things you can do for mental disorders, which might just be specific to that and go beyond the stuff for, say, type 2 diabetes or weight loss or various other things that metabolic strategies can help with, staying within a particular range of ketones, staying within a particular range of blood glucose, and so on.
Yeah, I think that's so important because it's not a one size fits all. Some people may need a more strict ketogenic diet. Some people maybe need just a lower carb diet. Some people just cutting out the sodas, maybe that makes them better. I think and I see it a lot. Even my diabetics, my type 1 diabetics in particular, will say if their sugars get too high, they start getting agitated, stressed out, and anxious. But also when they get anxious, their numbers get messed up with the stress hormones and cortisol and sleep deprivation. And so it's really it's really figuring out how to stabilize, to get our body likes this stability of this homeostasis, we call it, instead of being up and down and shocked and stressed out and not stressed out. And so, Rachel, what do you see in that?
Yeah, I was just thinking, those are all the reasons why I'm so excited about the field of metabolic psychiatry and where this is all going to develop in terms of the research. Because obviously Chris Palmer published last year. I also published a book last year, just making all the connections between metabolic health and mental health, and actually going through all of the research and trying to piece that together in a format that the everyday person would understand really hit home to me that there are so many good explanations based on our kind of physiology and biochemistry and all the different bodily systems interacting with one another that really can explain away a lot of the mental disorders, if not all of them. Some of the research isn't there, but all of the basic principles are, and there are very clear connections that you can make. And I think when you start to grasp that and understand just how crucial metabolic health is for mental health, then that's going to be explosive in terms of pulling apart and destigmatizing a lot of the stigma that does tend to be there for people with mental health problems.
And so, you have to tell us the name of your book. You can't leave us hanging here.
Oh, right. It's called Metabolic Madness.
Awesome. Yeah, that's so important. I think, for me, that, we made a movie called Fat Fiction. I was in there with some of my patients, and the movie was really about reversing diabetes and metabolic disease. And so these patients did it. But, the amazing thing is they told me, you sit back against the wall and listen to your patients, and we're going to interview them. And the amazing thing that came out is all of them said the most important thing was their mental health improved. anxiety, depression, mood. They cut it out of the movie back then because it was too controversial. I think that was probably around 2018, 19. And it was too controversial and they didn't want it to sound like, okay, it's a magic pill. But I really believe that if you get the mental health part about it, the physical health follows. Plus, with the physical health getting better, the mental health gets better. So, I've seen people with chronic pain, inflammation in their joints, no energy, don't feel like doing stuff. Then all of a sudden they say, I feel like working out. Not because they're trying to lose weight, because they feel like they have energy they want to use again.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that in your practices?
One of our heroes, David Unwin, he told me that the part of the problem with applying metabolic therapy to your patients in general practice is this broad spectrum improvement across almost all measurements of health. And when he was telling colleagues, even open-minded ones, he could tell that they thought he was either exaggerating or surely not making it up, but something wasn't right, because this was just too good to be true, which is one of the reasons he brought in Professor Roy Taylor to help publish all the data that he has, because it's clear as crystal that it comes out in the hard data. This works for many people, and it's nice, I think, as well, to niche down, particularly with mental health, because when you start thinking about troubleshooting, you kind of need to tailor it a little bit. Some people think that there's a sort of debate raging at the moment around protein to energy ratios and how much fat and what type of fat and all the rest of it. And I think people tend to talk past each other, and they're all saying roughly the same thing, which is that the individual really needs to try and to see what works for them. And yeah,
exactly my take on it. I haven't jumped into this fray that's going on, because I think it's absolutely true. I see some people benefit from one approach, other people from another, and even the same person may benefit from different approaches as they progress in their metabolic health. And I think to say, just do it this way and it works, it really is short-sighted. I agree with you 100% on that, especially from a mental health standpoint, because if we're looking at mental health or very poorly controlled diabetes, I have seen it with my own eyes multiple times where we put someone on a higher protein, low fat, ketogenic diet, cut out the processed foods, and their sugars go up like crazy. And then we put them on a higher fat version and their sugars drop like crazy. And it could be stress related, with cortisol levels, and there's so much involved that the same person, if someone's 450 pounds and their insulin is 100, they're going to be dying if you take all their fat away, because they can't get to their own fat stores to burn it. So all these things play a role, and you go, okay, in that same person where they may eat a higher fat for a week or two, and then boom, they don't need it, and we start tapering it down so they could burn their own body fat now. But if you have this wall of insulin there, you're not going to be able to get your own body stores.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention as well about an historic moment maybe. That Ian Campbell, another hero who's an academic at the University of Edinburgh, doing the study on ketogenic diets for bipolar, which is historic in itself. But he said the other day, because we were at the Public Health Collaboration meeting, that Rachel might be the first UK psychiatrist to treat someone successfully metabolically. And probably Rachel's better to speak about that than I am.
Gosh, I was buzzing so much that morning just from hearing all of the wonderful talks on metabolic health, that I think I do remember him saying that now, but I'd completely forgotten until you mentioned it there. So I work in a crisis team, and it's not always the ideal place to catch people, to say maybe if you make a dietary change, it could really impact positively on your mental health. But every now and again, I do find somebody who is willing to look at their diet and to think about changing. And just very recently, I had a lady who had been horrendously unwell for more than 6 months, with a severe agitated depression and bipolar disorder, and none of the medications or other treatment strategies were really helping. And coincidentally, she was somebody who just wasn't all that keen to really take medication, as it so happens, and did have a preference for using more natural health interventions. So eventually she did decide to start a ketogenic diet with me, and within 2 weeks, her mental health was about 70 to 80% better. And she's somebody I remain in contact with. And the last time I spoke to her, just in the last 2 weeks, she said to me that keto had been absolutely life-changing for her, and she wishes she'd known about it 20 years ago. And she's still pinching herself because she, on the one hand, can't really believe how well things are going for her, and like back at work and back socializing again. And you know, she's got her sense of humor, and there are no depressive symptoms, but neither are there any symptoms of hypomania or mania. And she was saying to me that a lot of her friends just think she's crazy, and she's trying to not be too evangelical about the ketogenic diet, but she's persisting with it. And then we had a funny conversation because she said sometimes she doubts it and she thinks maybe everything I've told her is just a load of nonsense. And so I had to say to her, well, you're the one living it. So, I mean, from what you're telling me, you're doing really well. So I wouldn't change a thing just now, and let's carry on and see where it goes. And she's quite happy to do that.
Yeah, and that's why bipolar is such a hard thing to treat, you know, because when they're up and up, they don't want to take anything to bring them down because they feel so good and they have the energy and they're partying all night and they're drinking and smoking and doing all this crazy stuff. And then when they're down, they're down. And then that's when you can really help them sometimes because they feel so terrible. They want to, and the higher they go up, the lower they go down, it seems. And so the hard thing with bipolar really is people always look at you and say, okay, is this the bipolar speaking, or are you stable right now? Right. Because you start seeing someone with pressured speech, or they get really excited about something and you think, oh, maybe they're going into a manic phase again. And it's so hard for the family or loved ones to deal with.
Yeah. Very difficult. And I mean, I really worried about this lady in terms of just her ultimate risk, because her life was horrendous. It was hellish for quite a number of months. But she's managed to come out the other side. And I'd had quite a long period of contact with her, so I feel like I really know her. Although most of that was in her kind of unwell state. But there had been glimpses from time to time of what would be her kind of more usual mood state, although it never lasted until she tried keto. So I feel very comfortable that she is doing really well now. So yeah,
and I think that's part of the hard part, I would think, on a ketogenic diet, because when people start getting manic, they go, okay, I'm having fun, and on both sides of the extreme, right? Because when you're really down, that's when people say, I need some candy or ice cream or cake. That they turn to that as their medicine to try to bring up their dopamine levels. And so it's really hard to balance that. And then when they're feeling really great, they don't want to listen to what you're saying when they're on the other end of it.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's really important before somebody embarks on a ketogenic diet, particularly for major mental disorders, to make sure you've hammered home that it is their choice what they do. But if they were to find success in using nutritional ketosis to control their mental disorder, if they do stray away from keto at any point in time, there's a risk that some of their symptoms will relapse, because we've seen that in epilepsy, that some people do experience a relapse of seizures after coming off the ketogenic diet.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to have close monitoring and people following, like both of you following, and just making sure. Because for me, I have so many patients, and I'm like, you get this stuff, why are you still following me, right? It's a waste of your time. And they say, well, I need the accountability, and if I know I'm meeting with you, I'm going to be better. If I stop seeing you, and I've had people stop seeing me, then all of a sudden 3 months later they go, I got to come back, I'm off the rails and I'm crazy, I don't know how to get back on track. And so it's such that continuation of care. I think that's such a huge thing. And also, to the point that Ali, you brought up, is this protein energy. They're talking about satiety per calorie and all this kind of stuff. My patients with binge eating disorder, those, I'll be stuffed, I'm not hungry at all. Hunger is not the driver. It's emotional instability. I have an empty part of my soul that I'm trying to fill. So I need to go, like, I'll drive to the store, and because all these techniques we try are really hard, because I'll say, well, just don't have that kind of food in your house. Like, I don't care. I'll get in my car at 3 a.m. and drive to a 24-hour store and get food. And I'll get, 3 dozen donuts and eat them all. It's incredible. So this whole concept of, okay, just get the calorie satiety, and you fix the satiety and everything. Satiety is critically important, but there's more to the story than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is how Rachel and I divided the talk on at the PHC meeting recently. Is Rachel was talking about the mechanistic, which is super important to understand, and you also need to understand who the human being is that you're talking to. And in each phase of what's going on, the mechanistic requirement may change. For example, when you start and you're eating less fat and you're using more fat in your body, it may come to a stage where you get to a certain percentage of body fat, and your fat kind of, as an evolutionarily evolved organ to prevent you from starving says, kind of seems like you're starving. We're not going to give you any more of this fat. And kind of counterintuitively, you actually need to eat more fat to get access to your onboard fat, and you feel better all round. Similarly, the level of emotional support as a human being might change that you need over the course of when you first hear about this kind of thing, when you kind of get used to hearing about all this new information, eating fat rather than carbs and all the rest of it, which is sort of completely new to some people. They don't even know what a carb is. And all the way through to the kind of long-term maintenance, like what you were talking about. And there's a lot of individuality to that too. You know, people's motivations are unguessable. You just have to ask them, and you get no idea why they're doing something. It might be trauma when they were younger. It might be that they are motivated by scientific data rather than something emotional, and they need to see some data in order to do something. But until you ask the people, and at the particular stage that they're at, you just can't know. And so that's why I think, you know, MetSci hopes to be that kind of long-term support for people, just like Virta is for type 2 diabetics, and just like the group support is for the Unwin's work, you know, is a mechanistic information service and a human support network.
Yeah, and it's critical. And plus, you know, the other side of the coin that people don't appreciate as much as I probably do, coming from a practice where I was working 18-hour days and stress and saying the same thing all day long. So I can meet with 50 people at one time, and we could talk, and I could say one time, right? And then we can interact and talk about what we're discussing, because it's overwhelming, because there's such a need in mental health, right? I don't know how it is in the UK and Ireland and Europe, but I've referred people for mental health to a psychiatrist, and they're talking about a 5 to 6 month waiting list just to get in to talk to someone. Like, what the heck is that? Well, we went through the most stressful period in human history, possibly. And, you know, with people, as we know, social disconnect and social isolation and not seeing human smiles and all those kind of things. And the impacts have been dramatic. And I think that's telling, is that our mental health is it's at its bare bones right now. They're just on survival mode, and they're trying to rush through and see as many patients as they can. And you can't really provide great care when you're trying to rush people through, especially when it's from a psychiatry standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, are you seeing the same?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly similar. I think it probably varies from area to area in terms of the NHS. I know certainly where I work, there is a policy when you get an urgent referral that people can be seen fairly quickly. But if you're talking about needing psychology, you could quite easily be looking at a year's waiting list, possibly longer, and it will vary from area to area. And yeah, absolutely. I've seen exactly the same need, particularly over the last 3 years in terms of everything that's happened and that we've come through. And I don't see that letting up anytime soon, really, because there have been so many knock-on effects in terms of people's mental health and the isolation in particular.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the problem is the psychiatrist is not going to, you know, if they have X number of minutes to spend with that patient, they're not talking nutrition at all, or sleep, or stress, or all these other factors. They're saying, okay, let's try to get your symptoms. We're putting a Band-Aid on the problem instead of underlooking, like Ali's saying. Let's talk for 45 minutes. Let's see, like, why is it that you want cookies all the time? Why is it that these are happening? And I think the other point that you raised that I love is knowing your why. A lot of people, you know, 6 months in or 3 months, they forget why they're doing it in the first place. Like, why am I doing this still? You know, and they don't realize, you know, that's why I love journaling. When patients will journal, they'll go, oh my gosh, when I was working out, when I was eating low carb, when I was doing, and everything was great. And then one weekend I go off, or I'm, you know, have a stress at work, and I eat cookies, and I can't stop for 3 months. And then their joint pains come back and their back pains, and they go, oh, I was feeling so much. But when they can see it, or even starting out and then seeing how much improvement they have over time, it's really remarkable. And that's the most important thing, because just from journaling, you can see what your mindset is at the moment, if you're negative and down, or you're upbeat, or, you know. So I think it's just such a valuable tool for the people who use that.
Yeah, definitely. I love the idea of journaling, and I love the idea of meditating. And before I changed my lifestyle, I tried meditation for anxiety, and it was somewhat helpful. And the feeling I got was of a detachment from the intrusive thoughts, so that I could say, okay, that's part of me, but it's not me. and I kind of started to visualize them as like fish swimming up to me. And so I would have, sometimes a really nice fat, juicy fish with shimmering scales and all the rest of it, and I could have a look at it and say, yeah, I'll keep that and have that for dinner. And then sometimes it was like a kind of three-eyed mutated monster, and I would have to put it back in the water and let it swim away. But the important point was it was detached. I was able to stand back a little bit. And it's something that I work with coaching clients on, is who or what is your inner saboteur? Who's sabotaging your progress? Who's getting in the way? What's getting in the way? And I ask people to visualize it. And it's a really powerful exercise, just like journaling. It gives you that distance, and it allows you to kind of embody what it is that's getting in your way. What is the obstacle? And you get this amazing range of answers. Sometimes it's like a cloud hanging over people. Sometimes it's a person that they know, like a really mean teacher or something like that. Or sometimes it's a completely new entity. And when I was thinking about who my saboteur was, who got me to reach for the foods I really didn't want to reach to when the chips were down, I found that he was sneaking in, and I didn't like him very much. So I called him Alan, the sneaky bastard. And so now when I go off the rails a little bit, everybody does, I think, well, that's just Alan being Alan. And I can put him in the corner, and I can minimize his effect on me. And
I think there's something to that. As a matter of fact, I have several patients now who are doing great with that. Basically they have this analogy in there's a book called Never Binge Again. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but they're talking about the same thing. They're saying, look, this primitive mind is, what makes you want to have sex with everyone. I want you to eat everything and drink everything and do all this stuff. And so at some point you say, okay, it's like a pig or something. Well, I'm going to put it in the cage, and you're locked up in the cage, and I'm in control now. You're not going to tell me, hey, you did so great this week. You deserve to have a cookie. Oh, you did so great. You can have another cookie, and these things, or your husband's a jerk. So you deserve to have this to make you feel better. And I have several patients that once they said, you know what, like what you're saying, the same thing is like, okay, I'm not listening to you anymore. I know you're a jerk, and you don't have my best interests at stake, because here are my goals, and you're keeping me from my goals. So I'm not listening to you anymore. And it's amazing how much power that can, especially if you have your nutrition balanced already. If your nutrition's out of whack, it's hard to put them in the cage, basically, right?
Yeah. And it kind of starts to chip away at your confidence. If the voice that you hear to eat the foods that you don't really want to eat those cookies, you might as well. You're not good enough. You're not going to be able to do it. If you feel like that is you, then that is much harder to shake off than if you feel it's just someone who's an annoying person who happens to reside in part of your head. It's a really important distinction for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's like if you have a friend who gives you bad advice all the time, you go, I'm not listening to you anymore. You give me bad advice every time. I lost all my money when I listened to your investment advice. So you learn sooner or later, you go, look, every time I listen to you, I get messed up, or my mental health suffers, or my physical health suffers. So do we all say, no, I'm not listening to you anymore? And so it's amazing how much, and I think another thing we could touch on is the amount of negative self-talk. Like, you can never do this. You've blown it every time before, people fear. As a matter of fact, one of my new patients, she was really emotional the first time we met. And I said, why are you so emotional? And I said, are you afraid of losing weight? What are you afraid of? And she said, I'm afraid that I'm going to lose weight and gain it all back again. That's my fear, is that I'll lose it. I know I can lose it because I've done it before, but then I gain it all back again. So that's something we have to address, because we have such self-doubt, because most of the time, by the time they get to us, they've struggled immensely throughout their entire life and tried everything they can, and they're desperate.
Yeah, and there's other kind of strange problems that come out of getting better. Like, people have to deal with trauma that they couldn't deal with before. And that's a good problem to have in a sense, because they just weren't even able to think about addressing it. But then as they build this platform of strength around their metabolic health, and they've eliminated some of the generation of these negative new self-talk and pathways that just don't happen as much when you're metabolically healthy, they actually find that there's stuff that they need to resolve, and even sometimes a sense of grief for the time they've lost. Rachel's patient talking about, I wish I'd known about this 20 years ago. And of course you can be grateful for the change that's happened, whilst acknowledging that, man, you've lost some time. It's hard.
Yeah, you can't redeem that time, and that's the hard thing, but you can do now and be better now. So there's always regrets that we have and go, gosh, I wish I would have handled that situation better. And, but I think this mental health, really, the reality is this: people can have 6-pack abs, they could get to their goal weight, but if they're miserable and depressed and anxious, what good is that? What good is that? I mean, the mental health is such an because that's the thing I was noticing is when the mental health gets better. So for instance, if someone's a stress eater and they get their stress level better because they're eating right, then they don't need to stress eat anymore because they're not stressed anymore. So many times people will tell me, you know what, a year ago, I would have handled this stressful situation way differently than I am now. And I'm going through whatever at work or I got laid off, but you know what, I'm not binge eating and I'm doing, and they're in control again, rather than being totally out of control. Rachel, is that what you see too?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just thinking, I think there's a bit of a spectrum in terms of people's experiences. So I think for some people, when they just get their nutrition right, then all of those other complications and difficulties around stress eating or emotional type eating can just disappear. And then I think there are other people where, there are other issues in their life in terms of stuff that's happened in the past or difficulties within families and relationships and other maintaining factors is what we'd probably call it in psychiatry. And that people then might need to do a bit more work on to, think of other strategies and learn from others in terms of ways they've found around those sorts of problems and difficulties. And that's why there is going to be a focus in terms of food addiction, because I think that comes into it hugely in terms of the ability of people to be successful when they make a big lifestyle change, because it's going to be a lot easier if you don't have a food addiction issue than if you do. And for some people, just getting your nutrition right can take away all the sort of physical addiction symptoms. But for others, there are going to be other more psychological type symptoms that might remain that you need more support with. And so that's going to be an interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah, and I had a really interesting chat with Dr. Georgia Eid about this when I was doing the training. She had a patient who had dreadful trauma, and of course, we all wish we could wave a magic wand and change someone's past so that it didn't happen, but we can't do that. And the way her patient described it was before she fixed her metabolic health, when her trauma was with her, it was like her hand was in front of her face. The trauma was right there. And then when she fixed her metabolic health, the trauma kind of was at arm's length. So it was there, she could see it, but she was much better placed to deal with it, and it wasn't imposing itself on her life in the same way. And I agree, there's going to be some spectrum of that, and whether that's trauma or even like physical impairment that can come around from years of metabolic poor health. And like you were talking about earlier, Brian, I love the philosophy of people changing over time, and so different solutions at different times might be required. And I think that's true in all of this.
Yeah, I think it's critical that we change our approach when needed, because I know you're going to tell me there's certain mental illnesses that might benefit more from a higher fat ketogenic diet, some that may benefit from a lower fat ketogenic diet or a low carb diet. And the other thing is too, on the other end of the spectrum, is some people, they do carnivore diet, they do low carb, they do keto, and they're really strict and they're working out 3 hours a day and they're doing all this, and then they get so obsessed that way where they're afraid. And then seriously, I have a doctor that I consulted with. She was 96 pounds, and I didn't know this at the time. I'm looking at her labs going, oh my goodness, this lady has to be like 500 pounds or something, because I'm looking at her sugar responses were absolutely insane. And it turns out she was working out 3 hours a day doing CrossFit. And whenever she worked out like that with zero carbohydrates and she had no body fat, her body was freaking out and stressing out, and her all of her numbers were off. All of her metabolic health was off. So we said, let's step back on the exercise a little bit and go up on your carbs intake, add in some sweet potatoes and a little bit of blueberries so your body's not freaking out. Her cortisol levels dropped, her sugar levels dropped, her insulin level everything got better. So you can be too good at stuff too. That's the other end of the extreme, when you think, oh, I got better by cutting my carbs to zero. And then at some point, you have to change what you're doing the other way and liberalize it a little bit too.
Yeah, I was just wondering when you were talking about her there, like, goodness, what were her cortisol levels like? So
Yeah,
that's
through the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, through the roof, because your body is so stressed and you're weighing 96 pounds and your cortisol, and it's the same thing. And I see it. And that's one thing when I see exorbitant LDL cholesterol, anorexia comes to mind for sure, because when you're anorexic, your body's kicking out every last drop of fat, trying to give you some energy to run on. It's kicking out to the bloodstream so your muscles and brain and heart can run on something. And so, yeah, there are extremes both ways. So you say, okay, if I put this lady on a super high protein, right, low carb, she's not going to do well. Liberalize her fat intake. She needs fat. She has no energy to run on. So give her some fat, give her some carbs, and she did better. And so you can get so obsessed the other way. Plus, it affects the gut microbiome and the stress cortisol levels. And, there's studies showing that just going for a 10-minute walk out in nature, you do better, from a cortisol level and a stress hormone. So we can be so stressed and so hyper vigilant that we weigh ourselves 6 times a day. I didn't lose weight. What's going on? And then you get so stressed, you don't lose weight because it's like watching that pot boil. You overwhelm it. So many people I know are trying to get pregnant, my wife included, and you're saying, okay, now's the time. We have to do it right now. Let's run. And it's so stressful. Then you go on vacation and it just happens. You're not even trying, because those stress hormones and cortisol and all those things really play a role. So understanding that in the setting of mental health. So then maybe that's why some people benefit. I've always wondered, because I've seen a number of people, and I've noted this from our first podcast, is I've seen a number of people go carnivore and all of a sudden their mental health gets better. And I was like, were they missing something, or were they adding something? And why is it that they're getting so much better, at least initially? Why is that? And so there's so many factors involved. And part of it may be that if they're carnivore, they're not even thinking about sweet stuff at all. And they're not having these binges that happen every now and again with people even on a keto diet, where they go, I don't care, there's bread and pasta, I'm having it, So it may be they're not getting as many fluctuations hormonally, but it's really an interesting observation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the first times that I really thought seriously about the link between diet and mental health improvement came from somebody who's now a good friend who resolved kind of 40 years of major depression and some psychotic symptoms by going carnivore. And it was really quite profound listening to that story. But I've kind of been immersed in that world for a few years now, and I'm quite excited for the future, although I don't know that we're necessarily going to get all the answers, but I do think the microbiome is crucial, and there's going to be more and more that comes out about that. I have a functional medicine doctor friend in the UK who said to me sort of unofficially that a lot of their patients that they've done microbiome testing on, a lot of the best results are coming from their carnivore subset of patients. But, who knows? And I think the microbiome is so affected by so many different things. It's not just what we eat, it's our circadian rhythms and sunlight and environmental exposures. And so, yeah, I don't know that we can claim to know what actually is a healthy microbiome, more so what causes problems at other times.
Yeah, and there's actually studies along that, because I actually got a chastising from one of the leaders of the low carb community. Said, Brian, you can't talk about microbiome. There's no science there. I was like, I looked at 60 studies in preparation for this little 3-minute part of my talk, but when you see it, you say, wow, that is really remarkable. Low mucus, mucus that protects the colon lining. If you absorb a lot of lipopolysaccharide, and I've seen it, where we treat someone for parasites, for instance, right? And all of a sudden they go through major depression, anxiety, asthma, all this crazy stuff flares up, eczema. And once they get their gut right, then all of a sudden all that goes away. So yeah, there's definitely something to that. There's studies with lipopolysaccharide in Germany where they took these healthy college students and they inject them with a little bit of this stuff, and then they're happy and everything's great. By the end of the day, they're depressed, anxious, suicidal. So to say that has no effect, I think that's really a stretch. And we're learning more and more. We don't have all the science, like you said. We'll probably not know in our lifetime maybe all the answers, but we know certain things are working, and then it may be working by a different mechanism than what we think it is.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
part of the psychology that Georgia talks about around humans kind of tend to want to add the next silver bullet, like the goji berry or whatever, and make everything okay. It's much harder to sell this idea of removing the worst offenders. And this plays into the idea of how to support people properly and how to actually make it attractive, and this is something I spoke about again recently, picking up from the kind of rabbit hole that I've gone down on the left and right hemisphere differences in the brain and what they bring in terms of specialization and how we are interested in the world. And the kind of, it's something I would recommend looking into. Dr. Ian McGilchrist's channel. He's a psychiatrist here in the UK, talking about how, the left hemisphere tends to want to split the world up into factoids and chunks of information like that, whereas the right hemisphere is much better at common sense and wisdom and flow and jokes and all of these things that are kind of human. And I think what makes things attractive in terms of, even things like advertising products is appealing to the right hemisphere sensibilities. And I think that's true of any long-term support for any health, is, meeting the human with humor and with wisdom and with understanding and with common sense, and not getting too narrowly focused on any one particular mechanism and hyper focusing on it. So the gut microbiome is super fascinating as well. I love the work that's been done in Glasgow on fecal microbiota transplants, which for C. difficile, which is a life-threatening condition, it's like 96% effective. So you basically replace the gut microbiome that's there with a healthy person's, and you get better. So there's all this really interesting young science around it. And I think fusing that with the understanding that people need a bit of humor, a bit of wisdom, a bit of understanding thrown in is where the magic happens for me.
Yeah, that plays a huge role. Like just being able to laugh and relax and waste time sometimes. Yeah, a lot of us who are very motivated, it's hard for us to just sit there and look at a pond or do yoga, like you're saying. It's hard to, or meditation is so hard because you're like, oh, I got to pay my bills. I got to be out of this meeting. Oh, I have to do this. It's like, okay, take a breath and relax. And so I have patients who will just say, let's just breathe for a second because you're so stressed. You're making me stressed. Like I'm absorbing it from you, So it's funny because, when we're so driven, and the other thing that's I think is an important thing from a mental health standpoint is when people go through major life stress, generally the first thing to go is exercise. They go, I don't have time to exercise. I'm too stressed out. But the exercise is the very thing that's going to help them, to keep their mental health balance. So, not in excess, but just saying, okay, let me just stay active and go for walks and let your body know you're not dying. And so it's the same thing we see from a weight loss or a diabetes control standpoint. Is it's much harder to do. And that's the other thing is, even now we're getting breakthroughs with metabolic health and understanding exercise physiology and how do we burn the most fat? How do we, get the most bang for our buck from exercise? Do we have to work out 3 hours a day, or can we get the same benefit in 20 minutes or half an hour of intense workout? So yeah, it's really exciting to see how when we put all these things together, because if someone's majorly depressed, they have zero interest in exercise. I've had patients go, I know I should be, but I just can't get out of bed. I don't have the energy. I don't know what shoes to put on. I can't think for myself. And so it's so hard to break through that, I think that's why nutrition can have such a huge role up front and then get you to exercise when you're feeling better, maybe too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I haven't been in that position, but I've certainly worked with a lot of people before who it's a major struggle to get out of bed, or even, those people you see and you say, have you had a shower this week? Or when did you last wash? And unfortunately, usually what I see in people's homes is, packets of crisps or chips lying around and sweets and it shouldn't be too difficult once you have the right knowledge and understanding to start to implement just a minor change to begin with in diet. But if you think about it, really, all of our neurotransmitters come from the food that we eat and are manufactured from that. And I don't think neurotransmitters are the be all and end all by any means when it comes to mental health, but they're certainly a factor in there. And you've got to start somewhere. And sometimes just putting some good food in is the first crucial step in actually managing to get out of bed.
Yeah, and as we know, the serotonin levels in the gut, that's a huge factor too. And that's why, like Ali, what you're saying with regard to the fecal transplant, which is interesting, is they'll do transplants with the people not even knowing each other. And the person who received the transplant starts losing weight because they got it from a fit individual. And also they say, yeah, I crave kimchi and sauerkraut now, but before they were craving donuts and cake. And it's amazing how this, and they go back to the donor and they say, oh yeah, I eat sauerkraut when I'm hungry. That kind of thing. You go, wow, that's crazy. So there's definitely some interactions with the gut and the brain. And so stress, all these things play a role. So, it'll be really interesting what we come up with all the mechanisms down the road. But right now we can say, if you take out the garbage food, you start watching your stress levels, you meditate, you do your whatever, where I don't care. I've as a matter of fact, a psychiatrist who lost like 36 pounds when she started knitting, because the knitting was her stress relief, and she wasn't eating cookies because she said, I'll just do my knitting for an hour and I'll feel better from the stress of the day. Just doing that. It's not like she's burning that many calories just doing her knitting, right? But it changed her outlook on stuff. And so as a matter of fact, it's funny, I was talking about it. One of my patients yesterday said, you know what? When you said that about knitting, I just started knitting. And she said, guess what? I haven't been snacking at night. I mean, it's amazing because you're bored. Boredom's another thing. And being locked up at home by yourself is not helpful when when you have struggles with food, because you're going to go to the fridge all day. So those of us who stay busy and keep ourselves busy, that keeps us away from that too. Just going for a little walk after dinner or before dinner when you snack, things like these little tricks like that seem to be really helpful. Because what I'm finding is so many people will come to me and they know everything. They've read Jason Fung's book, they've read Unwin's work, they know it all, but they go, I know it here, but translating it to what I should do is hard, right? I need help getting started. Where do I start? What do I do? And so the practicality, and that's why what you're doing is so important too, because once you get the mental health right, then everything else seems to follow also. It's really amazing when you see that person come in like down and depressed, and then 2 weeks later you see them smiling and laughing and saying, hey, guess what? Let me tell you a joke. It's like, you weren't joking 2 weeks ago. Now you're like, your brain's different. So it's amazing. And Ali, before we go, I want to ask you about, you did an experiment recently with fast food, right?
Yeah, so in October, I did an experiment that I called Mctober, where I only ate the McDonald's triple burgers without the bun. So it had the condiments and the sort of chopped onions and pickle on it, but it was just the patties with that. And then I supplemented that with egg yolks cooked in beef dripping. And I was already close to carnivore before that, but really I felt amazing. It was really great. And I'd partially lost my sense of smell in 2014, and it came back to a large extent in October. And my mental health was already really good, as I said, after I changed my diet in 2016, but it really kind of tuned up even a little bit further. I felt sharper, and my mood was even better, if anything. So that was interesting, because I wanted to show people that it doesn't need to be everything organic, pasture for life, grass-fed, 100% elite diet just for people who can afford, rare ribeyes. That there's many ways to skin the cat.
I've got Ken Berry in my head when you're talking about that. So
I was thinking the same thing.
Massaged. Right?
Yeah, it's the same thing. And so you go, look, there's ways to do it. Like, nowadays eggs are more expensive than ribeye, I think, per pound, maybe. I don't know. But anyways, it is just kind of figuring out what works for you and saying, yeah, if you like eggs, you could do it that way. If you don't like eggs, don't eat eggs every day. And so you kind of just, we kind of go around to see what works from a financial standpoint and whatever. So I have to ask you both, since we're getting towards the end here, what's life's best medicine for you? Because this will be simulcast on life's best medicine. So I always have to ask this question. So Ali, what's life's best medicine when you go, look, when things are down, like what motivates you? What gets you out of bed? What gets you going when the days are hard? And what we've been through over the last 3 years or so, where do you find your peace? What's your thing in life?
Yeah, so I sometimes call myself a recovering physicist, and it's not just because I got better, physically and mentally. I think it's because I tend to view life in that more sort of right hemisphere dominant way now. And ironically though, as a physicist, I'm always looking for what is the most upstream effect I can identify as a potential root cause, this root cause analysis type thing. And honestly, for me and for clients, it's, am I being kind to myself? I think that's a very hard question for people to ask. And it's very powerful, because sometimes, we all, including myself, speak to ourselves like we would never, ever speak to a close friend or loved one. And so that's what I try to do, is ask every day, am I being kind to myself? And how that comes out is in various ways, but if I had to choose one, it would be exercise. Just exercise that I enjoy. So I like going for a walk. I like going for a cycle. I like doing yoga. I like lifting weights. And I don't go too hard on it.
That's awesome. I think that's so important. I mean, I see it all the time on Twitter. People who are nasty, it's like they must not be very nice to themselves, because usually you don't go out of your way to be nasty to people. And I see that and go, how would you be so nasty? Like, someone loses 100 pounds. I go, look at that loose skin. It's disgusting. It's like they lost 100 pounds. Like, that's a huge, like, you can't find anything kind to say or nice, but I think that's so true. If more people were like that, say, I enjoy exercise, I enjoy doing things where I just go out and, sometimes you can clear your mind and you come up with new ideas, that's really awesome, because I never think about gravitational waves. That never crosses my mind. So to want to dedicate your life to gravitational waves, I wonder where you'd be if you would just study gravitational waves right now and not doing what you're doing.
Well, there is an irony there, because I was ill during my PhD, and my name is on the scientific paper with all the other worldwide collaborators at the time, who the head of the worldwide collaboration, the heads of the worldwide collaboration won the Nobel Prize in Physics for that paper. And I was basically unwell researching low carb strategies for better health while my name is actually on it. So I don't think about gravitational waves much either, frankly.
And Dr. Rachel, what about for you? What's life's best medicine?
Oh, for me, it's just getting out in nature. So, like, if I'm at my most stressed or just having a really bad day, every so often you get a day and your mood's just not where it should be. It never fails. So we've got kind of a forest quite close to us, and just actually getting in amongst nature, and it sounds silly, but hearing the birds and just nature sounds and grounding that way, I just think there's no better medicine than that.
Yeah, that's so great. And there's actually studies coming out confirming these things, talking about, and I love it because people anecdotally will tell me, when I sit in the sauna, I feel great. It's like, oh, you know what? Lowers cortisol by 30%. Oh, you go out for a walk in nature, lowers cortisol, it decreases stress hormones, all that. So in a busy day, if someone could take 10 minutes and just go walk in nature, like you said, grounding, just being outside, touching nature, going and work in the yard, whatever you do. I mean, that is such a huge thing that so many people in our busy life are missing out. And I always wonder that when I see someone who's grumpy and cantankerous and agitated and all that, it's like, gosh, why isn't they just took their shoes off and walked around in nature a little bit and just look at the beauty around them? I mean, it's hard to be in negative mood when you see beautiful stuff, sitting at the beach or whatever, and seeing the waves crashing, or, hearing the birds, watching little animals chase each other, whatever they do out there. And you go, this is going on all the time. And I'm stuck in my little office under these fluorescent lights, So yeah, that's such great medicine. I think both of you, I'm so excited about what you're doing, and it's going to help a lot of people. Also, is it like worldwide where people can sign up with you, or is it local, or what are you doing?
Yeah, people can sign up worldwide, and would be interested in people going to metpsy.com, which is METPSY, and signing up to the mailing list and getting in touch. And particularly, we're interested in talking with doctors who want to refer their patients to that kind of extra service. So we'd love to speak to you too. It's going to be global.
Yeah, and it's so critically important. Oh, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I think it could be for anyone potentially. So it's not even necessarily for people with a diagnosed mental illness, but I don't think I'm speaking just for myself here, but we both passionately believe that good nutrition and metabolic strategies have the potential to help everybody across the board.
Yeah. And even if it's adjunctive therapy, if you go, okay, look, let's do everything we can do, right? And some people are going to be on meds and they're going to need meds. So don't get us wrong that everyone can just throw their meds in the garbage and walk away and everything's great, right? So I think it's saying, what can we do? How can we minimize our meds? Because I'm seeing people who are tapering their meds, or they're stopping their anxiety meds altogether, or their depression. They go, I feel great. My mood's great. Let's keep an eye on it. Let's slowly do this, right? And get you off your meds. And so it's amazing when people who've been dependent on meds no longer need them. And it's we see that obviously from a hypertension, diabetes. The great work is you brought up Dr. Unwin, all these people on the forefront who I can say confidently now, yeah, we can get you off, diabetes medicine. Yes, we can get you off blood pressure medicines and mood pills, whatever, especially when you don't need, because a lot of times what's happening is people may come in taking Xanax or an anxiolytic all the time and they go, I haven't taken that in 2 months. Great. They haven't needed it, because if they're not stressed, they're not taking it just for fun. It's they're treating their underlying anxiety. So when we knock that out and people throw that, or take it to a responsible place to recycle it, it's amazing. It's amazing what we can do. And so that's why I'm excited about what you're doing. And I hope a lot of my patients will reach out to you and say, hey, I need help. I need some extra help. And just having that connection, and that just knowing someone's in their corner, sometimes just a text message, say, hey, we're thinking about you today. They may have no one else in their life who really is reaching out. So what you're doing is critically important. So I'm glad to get you on both podcasts, and I'm glad you can share your message. Any words of wisdom on the way out?
I was just going to add to what you were saying there in terms of psychiatric medications. And one of my biggest hopes, and I think we could make such a difference to people's metabolic health in terms of the weight gain and the insulin resistance that people end up developing on some of the medications that I prescribe. I think, low carb, keto, whatever sort of variation of it you want to call it, has the potential to make a huge difference, even just to physical health for people who need to continue on those medications. And then, just to reiterate what you said, that there will be some people who manage to lower doses and potentially may be able to stop medications. So that's my hope.
Ali, you had something you want to throw in there?
Yeah, definitely. Just to kind of agree with both of you there, that some people will come in using psychiatric medications who will need to work with a prescriber whilst they're going through coaching. No doubt about it, because ketogenic diets and lifestyle interventions are so powerful, potentially, that you need to be aware of that, and there can be interactions. And it's the responsible thing to work with your prescriber to make sure that it's tapered safely. And beyond that, you asked for words of wisdom. I'm not sure if I can help you there.
No, you have a ton of wisdom. You have a lot of life experience, and that's what. I know you're saving it all for your patients that you're helping out, to your clients. And so, hey, everyone, this is a PhD level of understanding life, what matters, what's important. Maybe even talking nice to ourselves. I always say, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and this is what's coming out of this talk too. And don't give up. If you're depressed, anxious, stressed, you have a family member who's been in the tank or struggling with addiction, reach out, get some help. There's some great people out there who are starting to understand what we can do, because if we can get the mood better, everything follows. Really, like Georgia Eats says, our brain is not separate from our body, and so many of us think that, but it's not true. It's all connected. You got blood pumping everywhere, and you got insulin resistance in the brain, just like in the heart and the kidneys and everywhere else. So think about these things, and if you're struggling, really, because so many people one of the horrible things when people talk about heaven and hell, I think hell is the absence of hope. When you just are sitting there and you go, nothing's ever going to get better. Why should I even try? This nihilistic idea. And so sometimes just reaching out and saying, hey, I'm in the pit. I need help. And sooner or later you start seeing the light. It may take a little while, but just keep that hope, and one step at a time, and do whatever you can health-wise to get yourself better, even if you're way at the pit. This is why we started the podcast, is for people who are just beyond hope. And there's always hope. There's always something will get better. A lot of us have seen over the last few years, things have gotten significantly better for us. But in the middle of it, you think, gosh darn it, I'm never going to see someone smile again. I'm never going to, hug my grandpa or whatever. So, all these things in life. And I think there's so much wisdom that we talked about here that's going to be beneficial and helpful. So, just take one step at a time, wherever you are, start the journey and reach out for help. And again, it's metpsy.com. If you need help, reach out to these guys and let them get you on track. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, you, Brian. It's been a pleasure.